started, I wanted to start with introductions, and I see we have a lot of people here, so it might take a while to go around the room. So I'm just going to ask if everybody would mind introducing yourself in the chat, while perhaps we can start off with introducing the panelists. So I would ask everybody that if you're not speaking to mute yourself, just to ensure that we have, kind of less background noise. I have cats that are probably going to show up at some point, and hope I get to see some of your cats and dogs as well. Please feel free if you have questions. We do have a set of questions that we asked everyone to provide us for the panel. Kathy Kennedy will be moderating, but if you have more questions, please put them in the chat. Bethany and myself will be checking and making sure those questions get put forward as well. The panelists will be giving a presentation to start off with, and then we'll get into our burning questions. But I'm hoping what we could start off with is just a little bit of an introduction. I've asked the panelists if they wouldn't mind just introducing themselves and how they got involved in food in the first place. So I'd like to start off with Ramsay Hart. So Ramsay is from the table in Perth, and Ramsay and I had a chance to work with a few of you that I can see here as well on some rural poverty advocacy work a couple of years ago. So Ramsay, if you wouldn't mind telling us how you got involved with food.
Sure. Well, I've always been involved with food in different ways. Yes, I love to cook and garden all my life, but in terms of it being the focus of my work life, it's when I joined the table, actually. So it was really a first time that I dove into this, and I was attracted to it because the progressive nature of the organization and meeting communities, but with a much bigger vision. I had been organizing a couple of community feasts in Ottawa and just loved the aspect of bringing people together around food and creating social connections and ties through food. So that's my story.
Oh, I'd like to also introduce Debra Swan, also from a Canadian Food Centre, the local. So thanks so much, Debra, for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm with, as you said, the local Community Food Centre. We're also affiliated, as the table is, with Community Food Centres Canada. And I believe, Ramsay, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the table and the local were the first community food centres that were established by Community Food Centres Canada. Ramsay's organization existed as something else before the table, and built the table out of that. And the one in Stratford was built from the ground up. So a few different processes to create the food centers, but ultimately we're all working towards the same goal under the same model. So myself, I've been with the local for 5 years. I've always been passionate about supporting and helping the marginalized among us. I always believe very emphatically that everyone has something to contribute if they're given the chance, no matter what their circumstances. And that's sort of my mantra of life, and fits very well with the model of the food center. So while I haven't always been involved with food insecurity directly as I am now, I've always been involved. I've got a 35-year career behind me with working with people who are marginalized for no good reason. So that's where I am.
Thanks, Debra. I'd like to next introduce Katie German from FoodShare Toronto, who's the Director of Advocacy and Programming. Katie and I had a chance to get to know each other a bit at a Maitri policy school. So we've had lots of chats about policy advocacy, and also super excited to have you here. So I know you have a super long career working in the field, and I'll pass it over to you to tell us more.
Thanks. Hey, everyone. Nice to see you all. Looking forward to talking some more. So I am from FoodShare Toronto, which is a Toronto-based organization that's been around for over 30 years, working on long-term solutions to food security and food justice. So we're quite large in terms of our organizational size, and we're quite broad in terms of the many different types of things that we do in the world of food. So the questions were really interesting to me today, because I think that we can speak to a number of changes that FoodShare has made in recent years that might be able to help with some thinking about what to prioritize, what to do, and where to put your energy and your efforts and things like that. So I came to FoodShare with a background in community organizing, and try to apply that lens of sort of advocacy and community mobilization around issues of food. And also because I just love food, I love to eat. And my parents are both from large farming families. So I have sort of a farming background in an urban environment. So anyways, excited to meet you all and chat a little bit more today.
Thanks, Katie. And I'm also really excited to have John Kleingeltink here from Operation Sharing in Woodstock. Really exciting programs. And John, I'll let you take it away.
As I've been involved with working with the impoverished for a number of years, and particularly with our church, and also learning a lot about poverty in general. And obviously food is one of the issues. So we're kind of looking at a holistic approach on how to deal with food and people in general that are suffering the effects of living in poverty. So yeah, so it's I'll get into a little bit further about what our organization does with regards to food. So I can take it from there.
Great, thanks, John. So we're going to start. I'm going to pass this over to Kathy Kennedy, who's our moderator. We're going to be starting off with some presentations.
Great. Well, welcome everybody who's on. I think we're up to about 38 people on the call right now. So great to for the folks that have just come on recently. Welcome. And Chris, if you can just help me remember, we've got 10 minutes for each participant, and then the panel discussion. How long do we have after for the panel discussion?
The rest of the time, so until noon. So that should give us like an hour and 20 minutes roughly for discussion.
Okay, super. So we're going to ask people to, we do have some questions prepared, and I think everybody's seen those, but also if you'd like to ask a question to the panelist, feel free to put it in the chat as it comes to your, as it comes to mind. And then as we, when we're finished, we'll make sure that we have an opportunity for questions and also to follow up on the ones that are in the chat. So, do we have Debra going first today? Are you up first, Debra? And I think we've got you on mute right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the order of things, but I'm happy to go first if that's the plan.
Okay, super.
And I'm going to go for about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to pass it over to Ramsay to finish off the presentation on behalf of both of us. So I'm going to try and be as specific and brief as I can around the questions, just because of the time limit. But the first question around program development and pivoting our approaches. And again, I just want to highlight that I'm speaking about the local as it is, not during COVID, but as it is in regular times. So the first thing that we know is that charity does not address food insecurity. And so we don't want to work towards a charity model. So our model is more about using food as a conduit to bring people together, to reduce their isolation, to make them feel part of a community, and to make them feel safe in a safe space, and to take part in their own empowerment. So we work around 4 different pillars, and so there's food access through community meals, and we have a low-cost market and those sorts of services. There's a skill-based component to the programs that we provide. So we do a lot of gardening programs for various groups and food skills programs. But the biggest part, I think, that often gets overlooked is the advocacy work and the social justice work, because poverty is a systemic issue. And so it's really about trying to address the issues from a systemic viewpoint, not just from a personal viewpoint of, handing out food to people. So that's how we operate. And I can tell you that 96% of the individuals coming through our doors say that they feel like they're part of a community, they feel welcome, they feel that they're in a safe space, they return for those reasons. And about, I don't know what it is across the board. I suspect the table is, statistics are very similar to ours, but close to 65% of our volunteers were people who first came through the door because they had a need or were looking for some sort of service. So around best practices, I think where we start is we believe that food security is an issue of justice, not an issue of charity. And so we really approach things from that perspective. We believe people need to be seen and heard, and they need to be part of the solution as far as inviting them in to become part of our community. So, so it's not just about providing food to people, it's more about providing people with a sense of belonging. And the bottom tier of that is always providing whatever you do in a dignified way. And so we do no means testing. If you are still doing means testing, I urge you to stop. It is the most undignified way to provide service to people. And if you're talking about wanting to remove stigma, means testing is, if you're still doing means testing, you're never going to remove that stigma. So I really encourage you to not do any means testing whatsoever, and to welcome everybody. And it's really about treating everybody the same and not seeing our neighbors as being any different, whether they are food insecure or not. And really, there's no good way of being able to judge whether somebody's food insecure by just looking at how they present themselves or looking where they live or any of that sort of thing. We don't really know what's happening in people's lives. We see a tiny snapshot of things. And if we treat everybody the same, you will definitely be serving those who are food insecure. Programs need to really be creative in how they are developed. There should be a really good evaluation component to them. And they should be offered again to everybody in the community. So people should not have to prove they have a need or not, or prove they don't have a need. Sorry, I'm just trying to get the questions up again as I. So I can't get my screen up again just for my reference, but at any rate, the other piece I think you were asking about was program development. Can you give me the third and fourth question? Sorry.
Yep. So Debra, the third question was about challenges that you've faced, and the fourth one, I think you've talked a bit about how you engage people who are food insecure to reduce stigma. And the next one is, how did you shift to that new form?
Right. Okay. So the challenges, I think the biggest challenge was to help the community understand we weren't a food bank, and that there was a difference between what we do and what food banks do. And in that conversation, ensuring that we weren't saying, one was better than the other. We both sort of serve a purpose in the community. That the analogy I like to give is that the food bank is like the emergency room, because some food is better than no food. And as food banks start looking at the type of food that they are distributing, it is becoming more thoughtful around the healthy food, and trying to get away from the prepackaged stuff. But we always sort of look at the food bank as the emergency room, and the community food center is like the wellness center. So we try to help people become healthy through access to really good food. We try to help them understand how to prepare that food, how to grow that food, and really take it from seed to plate, and empower themselves that way. And then the other piece, and again, this is as important and often overlooked, is the advocacy piece. So helping people have a voice, and helping them recognize through our social justice programs that a collective rational voice is much more effective than one angry voice with the system. So really helping them learn the skills they need to be able to not only advocate for themselves, but for their community as well, for the things that they need. And I think I can pass it over to you, Ramsay, at this point, unless you have something to add to what I've already said.
I can take it from there, I guess, with the next 5 questions. So I'm just going to share my screen, hopefully. So most community food centers, like the local and the table, and I think we're up to 13 now food centers across Canada. And they exist in a wide variety of communities, from inner cities to Iqaluits. We have several that are either right on Indigenous reserves. There's one within a Mi'kmaq community, and also closely associated with Indigenous communities. And we have smaller rural towns like Perth, Nelson, BC, and Stratford. We all offer similar programs, but we also each have our own unique suite of programs. So in our case, we do run a food bank. And as Debra mentioned, we were a pre-existing organization, and that was sort of a more conventional food bank, and evolved into a community food center. So this is the programs we offered in 2019 in a more typical year of programming. Those that are highlighted are the ones that we continue to operate through the pandemic. And we've also added a few, including a fresh food box and a take-home meal kit program for kids and their families. I won't get too much into all the details of the programs. These are listed in our annual report, and if there's anywhere you would like specifics about program logic models, information, more than happy to share. All of what we have is readily available. I think maybe with one exception, there is a sort of copyrighted program that Community Food Centers Canada has developed that I think we're not supposed to share. So the one next question that we were asked to address was centralized versus decentralized programming. So part of the food center model is to bring multiple programs under one roof. And the advantages of that are making, stacking uses of things. So here you see a community kitchen group in our commercial kitchen. That commercial kitchen is used for our after school program, our community kitchens, and our community meals. It's used for packaging for other food programs. The garden brings produce in and processes it during the harvest season. So by sharing our resources, we get maximum use to the point where it's actually quite challenging to coordinate between the different programs and make sure nobody's stepping on each other's toes, literally and relationally within the kitchen. It also means cross-referring people to different programs. Somebody's already in the building and say, hey, have you talked to one of our community navigators? They might be able to help you reduce your energy bills or get access to some mental health supports. Hey, there's a meal going on upstairs. Why don't you go upstairs and have a meal after you're done shopping in the food bank? So there's a great opportunity there. It's great for staff to collaborate and share ideas. It creates a hub of services. On the flip side, we've actually outgrown our physical space and have needed to branch out to other community agencies to partner with them. So here we are running a youth program in one of the sort of multi-purpose spaces in an arena in Smiths Falls, doing a program with youth. So the advantages of decentralizing your program is that you can go to where people are. we had long thought about, well, how do we get the youth to the center, right? Like, we want to do youth programming. We got to get these young people into the center. And somebody was like, well, why don't you go to the youth? They're already at their youth center. Why, go through contortions to bring them to your center when they've got a place where they feel comfortable? So big advantage to decentralized programming is going to where people already gather, if there is such a place. You can do more, because if your physical space is limited, then it's limited. And especially in our rural context where we don't have public transportation and we have dispersed populations, and we, in our case, we're accessing resources on par with some big urban organizations, and to actually justify getting access to those resources, we need to get our numbers up, and we need to be doing more programming. And the only way we can do that is by reaching across Lanark County and doing programs at multiple sites. So we do a mix of both. And I think just evaluating your circumstances and what your objectives are will help you decide whether or not which option is better. I guess the last point about decentralized, creating a commercial kitchen is expensive. It's tens upwards, tens and tens of thousands of dollars to create a functioning commercial kitchen. So if you already have them in community halls and in service clubs and churches, then there's a tremendous opportunity. Many of those spaces are underutilized presently. The next one is the importance of space and the environment. A huge importance we place on this in community food centers. We have a long list of criteria we have to follow and are evaluated on by our central organization. And creating a welcoming, bright, inviting space is one of those criteria. So this is our facility. We recently had a compliment from somebody that is now in the law profession, but had a lived experience growing up in poverty. And he said how great he thought it was that the table had a presence on our main street that was modern and aesthetically pleasing. It looked good, as opposed to sort of behind the back alley at the back entrance of some other facility. You can't see our big logo. It's featured prominently on the front of the building when we don't have our COVID shelter up. And we also do things like, we've partnered with artists to do murals inside that you see on the top picture. And then we've partnered with a local photographer that's taken some brilliant photos of our programs, and we feature those throughout the building in nice enlargements that are framed and sort of just highlighting our programming and highlighting our community back to itself. So really big importance for us, and there's lots of different ways you can do that. I'd also say, and I'll get into this a bit on sustainability, but there in the charity model, sometimes there's a belief that you should look really modest and you should, not appear to be spending money on a building or something like that. And you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to be lavish necessarily, but there's no excuse for not having a presentable, clean, up-to-date, modern-looking facility. And in fact, I would strongly argue that both your participants or clients will want to use that space, and your donors will feel great about contributing to that space. People want to contribute to something that's successful, that's positive, and I guarantee that having a space that's welcoming to all will generate both greater participation and greater revenues coming into your organizations. This is a really important and tricky question to unpack, and we could certainly do many, many webinars, and people have done many webinars on this very topic, and Debra alluded to it as well. So what is the level of food insecurity after connecting with our programs? So we asked people, how important is the table in terms of a source of food, and the overwhelming majority of people tell us that the table is an important of healthy food during COVID or otherwise. And so we're very proud of that fact, and we're pleased to be contributing towards people's health and well-being through ensuring that they have some access and some improved access to healthy food. But we're also quite realistic, and we're also very familiar with the literature out there that says that food banks are not, and other community food programs do not really fundamentally address food insecurity. And if you're not familiar with this literature, Proof is a great source of thoughtful analysis and statistical analysis and research on food insecurity, and I'd encourage you to check out their documents and some of their pieces around challenging the idea that that food banks and community food programs can resolve food insecurity. And we certainly saw this during the pandemic. Like other rural food banks, at least in Lanark County, and from what I hear more broadly, but I won't speak to all rural food banks, we did not see an increase in access use during the pandemic at all in our food bank. Our community meals have been incredibly popular. We shifted to a takeout model, and lots of people have been accessing those. But despite the financial challenges, which are maybe in Perth and surrounding area aren't as extreme as they have been elsewhere, but despite certainly some economic challenges in the last while, we haven't seen any increase in food bank use. Why? My presumption and suggestion to you would be because of the stigma attached with using a food bank. Only 12% of people that identified as having challenges getting access to food during the pandemic access to food bank. And that's from a survey that we coordinated in August that we did. Over 800 people responded. And so a small wedge, the most food insecure primarily are the folks that are going to access food banks. Was asked to share some successes around policy advocacy. So this is a photo from our housing forum, which was the last big event we did before the pandemic made these kinds of wonderful gatherings. I'm looking at this getting so nostalgic. It was such a great event. We had 100 people come together to talk about the housing crisis in Lanark. It's maybe not quite as acute as you're experiencing in terms of gentrification that you have in the county. But we are on this sort of urban periphery with Ottawa. The eastern part of our county, Carleton Place, is growing rapidly and becoming suburbanized. And since the pandemic, we've had a massive influx of people that are relocating from the city, and rentals are massively competitive, and prices are going up and up and up. So we've been advocating around housing for I'd say about 5 years now. And the reason we have focused on housing is because we have a local connection to it. So there's a housing department at our county. We can access those folks. We can talk to them. It's very tangible and it's very important to our community base in terms of addressing the systemic issues that Debra mentioned earlier around poverty. We have also done a fair bit of advocacy around income supports, both improving social assistance and identifying opportunities for basic income or guaranteed annual income. So those are sort of the two tracks we've taken. And we've participated in Eat, Think, Vote around 2 election campaigns. So that's a national campaign organized by Food Secure Canada. And I think these are initiatives. Struggling for systemic change is not an easy thing to do. It's a long process. And so in engaging in these, even though we've certainly had some successes, housing is now a top of mind issue in our political scene locally. The pandemic has pushed that even further. But it is a long road to hoe, and it can be challenging. And so it's important that in engaging in advocacy, there's other advantages for people to get involved. So we want to make their efforts fun. We want to make them socially active and bringing people together and providing them with a positive experience of learning and growth while advocating for systemic change, because it is hard to stay motivated and keep involved in those things over the long haul. Addressing sustainability is, I think, my last question that I was to address. So my first point would be to encourage you to shift your mindset if necessary. And I don't want to sound too much like a self-help sort of new age guru or anything like that, but I want you to consider embracing abundance. And what do I mean by that? There is more money and more food available in this country and in this province than we could ever possibly know what to do with. So we just need to find it and access it and get it to the people that need it, and do that both in sort of the emergency immediate way and in a systemic way. That's not an easy thing to do, but we can do it. And so how do you do it? How do you mobilize resources that are existing? You need the staff to do it. You need people that are focusing on opportunities with grants. You need people to steward major donors. It doesn't just happen. You have to plan for it. So, we've got our strategic plan that we've done. One of the top priorities is really honing in on a more efficient fundraising program. And that's the focus on high impact fundraising. So if you need hundreds of thousands of dollars to run a program, you're not going to get there by running bake sales. So you need to be strategic, and you need to be a bit cutthroat in terms of what programs can get you to where you want to go. There may be other advantages to running bake sales in terms of outreach and community building and bringing people in, but you need to be very strategic about where you put your resources for fundraising. There's a lot of information out there right now around social enterprise, and there are certainly some opportunities there. We've spent 8 months looking at different social enterprise models, and we haven't really found one that we think is a good fit for us unless it's got a strong programmatic component. So my board mandated us to sort of try and identify a social enterprise that would generate $35,000 a year in revenue for the table. And it's like, if I could start a business and raise $35,000, maybe I'd just go do that, But so it's a really trendy thing right now, and I think there certainly are opportunities to do it. But I'd say enter cautiously and maybe start from your program perspective and see if there's ways that your programs can generate revenue to support them, rather than thinking you're going to start a business that's going to sort of sustain an organization. Because running a business, as any entrepreneur will tell you, is a challenging thing to do and make profit for. And so you're going to be directing resources from your programming into running a business, and is that where you want to be? The table has an endowment fund, and that's another opportunity. So if you have a community foundation, they might host an endowment fund, or you could just structure one within your own organization. But again, it's tricky. Are you going to divert operating revenue into the endowment fund? And at what point, what's the balance there? And so that's something we're still all sort of actively exploring and working through ourselves. And if I could say one thing, last thing about fundraising and sustainability, it's communicate, communicate, communicate. People need to know what you're doing. You need to communicate your values. You need to celebrate your successes, and you need to share that. You need to share it on social media. You need to show up at community festivals and have a table. You need to get on your local radio, print media. Does that even exist anymore in your area? I'm not sure. It doesn't really exist in Lanark anymore, unfortunately. But whatever options you have available to you, one of our big advantages in small communities is we do tend to have a narrower communication line. So we have, for example, one radio station that we can access, and lots of people listen to it here. And so I can call up Bob at the newsroom at Lake 88 and say, hey, Bob, can I get on the radio next week? He's like, yeah, sure. How about Thursday? And we do that. And then people know what we're doing. And so the table has an amazing presence in the community. I meant to mention this on high impact fundraising, but we're now getting, I think it's $82,000 a year in monthly donations. So those are donations, subscriptions. People are signing up monthly to donate. And we're generating over $80,000 a year in revenue from that, because people know what we do and they're engaged and they want to participate. And I think that is all I had to share with you for the moment. I'm more than happy to talk about any of these things later on, or if you want to get more detailed. My view is we've been extremely well supported both by Community Food Centers Canada and our community and different organizations across the country. And so more than happy to pay it forward and help other organizations figure out their own journey on this path.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ramsay and Debra, for bringing the Community Food Center perspective to us. And if I can just, some of the things that struck me, just to recap, sort of excellent thoughts on how to think about means testing that Debra described, also the role of evaluation in how we do our work and making sure that that's there. And also the interesting concept of emergency food versus wellness, kind of a wellness and ongoing concept. And Ramsay bringing forward the idea of cross-referencing programs, decentralizing programs, so really the integration. We all know how much commercial kitchens cost, so that was a great reminder. And the concept of abundance, both in how we think about our own resources that we're moving on, and also in terms of how we're resourcing our programs. So thank you very much, and I'm sure people have great questions that we'll follow up with after. Now we're going to hear from Katie, who is with FoodShare, and Katie, are you ready to go ahead? Anything we can do to
I think so.
start?
Did you,
Okay.
can everyone see that slide? Is that, it says intro to FoodShare, is that there? Great, okay, great. I just put a few pictures in so people can see photos, which is nice. So yeah, FoodShare is a Toronto-based organization. So I'm very mindful that some of these things might be very relevant to your context and some of them might not be relevant to your context, just in terms of geography and demographics and all of that. But oh, here we go. Okay, so I wanted to highlight a couple of sort of our sort of flagship sort of programs. So one is the Good Food Markets, and these are markets that are community run. FoodShare does not run these markets. Each one is run by a community organization or a resident group. They order the produce through us and then resell it at a place in their community. Some of those are Toronto community housing lobbies, like a lobby of an apartment building. Some of them are in parks. They have been running during COVID, which has been great, to be able to keep a food security and availability, like a source of available fresh produce going. One of the key things about Good Food Markets is because the community members themselves are ordering the food they want to resell. We have some Good Food Markets that are just 1 kilometer away and they have radically different produce available. Some markets prioritize buying only the most affordable items on the list that week. Some markets prioritize having organic options available because it's not available in their community. Some are prioritizing staple foods for their cultural community group. So we're not telling folks what food to make available. The community has full control over what foods they want to see be made available in their community. The other one is the Good Food Box, which I heard I think is happening in your community, which is great. For us at FoodShare, the Good Food Box is shifted from being sort of like this, the narrative around it was that it was about making food more affordable. It was run by volunteers and it had sort of like group drop-off locations. And it has since, when we did an evaluation of that project, we realized that we were, the most people that were buying the box were not food insecure. They had relatively higher incomes and they were purchasing the box because they wanted to support FoodShare. They thought it was like making a donation. So we've actually really radically reoriented the Good Food Box to make it be about convenience. To be clear about, you know, purchasing a Good Food Box means that you're generating revenue for our programs. We increase the price, we deliver it to your door, and we sell it online. So that's been a real shift from the idea of like bulk buying, low cost. And I think that it's also different than how some Good Food Boxes operate across the country. And then one of the new things we did this year is, for the very first time in our organizational history in 35 years, we started doing food that is free to the recipient. We have started, FoodShare started as a proclamation from the mayor in the 80s saying we have this crisis of hunger in the city, we're going to have food banks. We also, there shall be a food share, and they're going to focus on long-term solutions and not focus on emergency food distribution. With COVID, we quickly pivoted to realize that there was an urgent need to get food to people. And because we had reoriented our Good Food Box system to be online and delivered to your door, we were able to quickly scale it up so that we were purchasing boxes through funding, or community groups could purchase boxes through their own funding, and then we could deliver it to the recipient, free to the recipient. So now we're doing Good Food Boxes in which, you know, someone in the household is logging on and paying for a box. And then we're also doing emergency Good Food Boxes, which are being delivered to people's doors and they do not pay for it. A community group has paid for it, or FoodShare has paid for it through our own fundraising efforts. So that's a real pivot from FoodShare's narrative of, you know, we've never done emergency food relief, never done food banking type stuff. So for us, that means we used to do 300 deliveries a week pre-COVID of Good Food Boxes. We're now doing 5,000 deliveries a week. So there was a week in April where we hired 65 people over a 2-week period to join our team entirely in the food distribution sort of like side of our programs. We used to do 1 packing day a week, and we now do 2 shifts a day, 6 days a week. So our that sort of like social enterprise food distribution piece is radically different this year than if you've ever talked to FoodShare ever before. It also was a shift in good food markets. We used to have 51 good food markets working across the city, and we now have 12, because as soon as COVID started, the province shut down markets and the city said, we don't know if these are safe. So we've had to do a lot of advocacy work with public health and the province. They got shut down twice under the Reopening Ontario sort of act, of where we weren't a grocery store, we weren't retail, so we were considered non-essential. But for many of these folks, this was where they were accessing their food. And so we had to do a lot of advocacy with the province and the city to be able to get these markets back up and running. And the way that we're doing the emergency good food box so sort of quickly is through partnering with agencies across the city who are already working with folks who are food insecure. So FoodShare doesn't have to do the intake of people who are food insecure. We're working with food banks, agencies, mutual aid groups, resident-led groups. They're not all charities or nonprofits who tell us, here's a list of 20 people who we know need an emergency good food box this week. So to give you a sense of what we're currently doing, it's a little different. And then one of the sort of the key things that FoodShare has been going through a change in the last 5 years that's really central to the work that we're doing now is we've shifted from sort of describing ourselves as a food security organization or a community food security organization to instead being a food justice organization. And that means applying this food justice lens to all of our work, whether it's social enterprise, food distribution, or programs. So a few examples, this isn't all of them, but a few examples of what that looks like at FoodShare. We started a box 2 years ago, we called it the food justice box. And then this year we're like, let's just call it what it is. And it's the dismantling white supremacy box. That is a good food box that's only available in the season. And it's entirely supplied by growers who are Black, Indigenous, or racialized. So that's an example of like, if we have purchasing power and we think that here's this group of folks that don't often have access, where are we going to put our money? One thing is a shift is ensuring that all of our education that's happening in our spaces is culturally appropriate, the food itself, and culturally affirming. So if we are teaching about recipes, we're very mindful about white supremacy, what that looks like in a food system, and how can you deliver a community kitchen or a cooking program that is affirming of the foods that people eat at home. There's lots of food education that goes into a space and tells people that some foods are bad. And what does it mean if the food that you've just said is bad is the food that reminds me of my mother? What does that look like, right? So really trying to think about how do we affirm people in that space. We have a whole other program called Supportive Partnerships, which is where grassroots groups that are doing their own food justice work can be trusteed by FoodShare and have some capacity building and developing their own initiatives. So a group like that is Black Creek Community Farm, which is an 8-acre farm. They get a lot of support from FoodShare in grant writing and sort of developing their own systems. We used to do food literacy education, which we would describe as, learning how to cook and grow and eat from scratch. And we've really shifted that to say that it's food justice education. I'm really happy that Ramsay spoke about proof. That's a really central place to look for research. And one of the ones I point to all the time is there's really strong research that folks who are food insecure have cooking and recipe following and budgeting and shopping skills that are on par or higher than folks who are food secure. So there's not a gap in ability to follow a recipe. There's an issue with the system that is forcing folks to be low income. And so if we're going to be doing food education, we'll still eat food and cook food together, but we're going to prioritize a conversation about what the food system looks like, where's their sites of exploitation, and where can people be mobilized to address some of that. And then lastly, I'll mention our body positivity work, which is really trying to look at the myths around health claims, the myths around obesity, the myths around body size that sort of come all the time, even if you don't intend to, with conversations of food, and being really intentional about that, which has meant some difficult conversations with partners and funders and trying to kind of like bring people along with us. So in terms of some of the key questions that you all are interested in today, I think how programs developed, FoodShare has a history of saying that like, if it's about food, we do it. And if you live in Toronto, FoodShare is for you. And we've really shifted towards saying, where are the actual, where are the crisis points in food, where do we actually want to be spending our time and our energy and our resources? And who are the folks who are most food insecure, while maintaining this clear focus on, we don't do means testing and we want everything we do to be non-stigmatizing. So we've had to shift a lot of programs and a lot of sort of initiatives so that they align with that. In terms of best practices that we apply at the organization is that the folks who experience the most food insecurity should be at the front of the line. So that means when we're recruiting for our board, when we are looking at recruiting within our organization for employment, when we look at consulting with communities around designing an initiative or a program. It also means meaningful consultation. I've been to so many consultations where the person already made up their mind, and whatever you tell them, they're just checking off a box and there's no change. So we do have some processes set up around consultation, but there's some mechanisms in there that say if people tell you you're on the right track, you need to actually stop and listen to them and reorient so that that consultation is actually meaningful. And for us, community ownership. I think if we were running 50 markets across the city, there's a good chance, there's a white person saying, this is the food that you should be selling in your community. But the fact that the community themselves is saying, hey, do you have breadfruit on your list? Do you have this type of choy? Can you see if it's available? It means that the community themselves are owning the market, and those become much more vibrant and sustainable markets. They run in the long term because community has ownership over it. How to shift a program. So we've stopped a lot of programs. We've shifted a lot of programs, especially in the last 5 years. Some key things are to make a stakeholder map and decide who you need to talk to before making any changes so that they're on board before you announce something. That's what that pre-work is, like have some coffee meetings, talk to people about the types of things you might be thinking about, even though you kind of know you're going in that direction. Don't be afraid to be bold if something needs to change. And I think that to note that it doesn't need to be scary to change something. You can actually build some excitement around changing something and reorienting a project. And to know that you might lose some people, you might lose a funder, you might lose a partner, but you will gain the right people, and to keep that in mind. In terms of policy and advocacy, I used to be called the director of programs, and now I'm called the director of advocacy and programs. And part of that is us being intentional about reframing all of our programs so that they are driving at our advocacy goals. And that means that if you come to a community kitchen, you're learning about how in Toronto, we have a food charter. It's supposed to enshrine the right to food. We've had it for 20 years. And look at it, it's not working. So what types of mobilizations and activations do we want to do to put pressure on where pressure needs to be? So it's reframing a lot of our program work. A best practice for us is we have an advocacy committee, which has board members, staff members, and community members on it. And FoodShare does not endorse a single thing or take a public position on anything unless it goes through that advocacy committee first. And that's a nice way to build consensus around the thing that you're doing. And if you're sending something to the advocacy committee that you think they're going to say okay to and they don't, that means that you need to stop. And maybe there's some education work or some reframing or the wrong partners there or something. So that's been really helpful. We also established 4 pillars for our advocacy, which is reconciliation, racial justice, environmental justice, and advancing the right to food. And that becomes our central focus, which means, there was a time where FoodShare would have applied for funding to do, create a guidebook on what's in season locally in Ontario in March. We wouldn't do that now. We wouldn't apply for that funding. We would apply for something that maybe looks at the rights of migrant workers in the agricultural sector. So it's a reframing what we do and what we sort of apply for when we seek out funding. For us, we have a different story around social enterprise than Ramsay shared. Our social enterprise is about, pre-COVID, $2 million a year in revenue. So we have a very different social enterprise hat. So for us, we've really been investing in growing the unrestricted revenue sources, which for us is social enterprise, individual donors, large donors that aren't like a grant, donors that will give you a large gift and say, I trust you to do what's good because I've seen that your work is good. And also, I think I've been at FoodShare for 10 years, and I think there was often a hesitancy to do something bold because we might lose funders. And what I've seen is you might lose a couple, but you will gain more people who are very interested in what you're doing and what you're saying and what you're putting out in the world. And then invest in your staff. There are many people who work in food security organizations who are food insecure. And that's like fundamentally not good, right? So really making sure that we commit to living wages and benefits and whatever that means, because it also means people will stay and they'll stay with your programs and they'll want to come work at your place, and that helps with the sustainability of the organization. So that's my piece. I'm happy to share more. Hopefully that's kind of on the right track for you. So great.
Thank you so much, Katie. That I think I can feel everybody's like heads exploding out there in the audience, because you've given us so many great things to think about. You started off talking about how you shifted from a food security approach to a food justice approach, and you gave us all kinds of great examples about how you've actually done that. From thinking about who is at the front of the line in terms of staffing and resources and programming, to how you're understanding sort of skills in cooking classes, and also looking at the food system. And again, seeing the concept of abundance that Ramsay mentioned, both in terms of making sure that staff who are food insecure have abundance, and that philosophy and reframing leads to abundance and resourcing. So thank you for those great comments. I'm sure we'll have lots of follow-ups.
Great.
And again, make sure that you're putting your questions in the chat so you don't forget about them, because we've got one more excellent panelist. John is going to speak next, and then we'll open up the floor. So John, welcome, and we're glad to have you here.
Thanks for having us here. It's great to be having a discussion with a lot of different people that really seem to have the center of their mind is how do we help people keep their dignity. And that's part of our focus with all the work we do. One of the things we were originally back in around 13, 14 years ago, we were the official food bank in Woodstock, and we decided to close it, and we started issuing our own designed food cards so people were able to shop for themselves where everybody else in the community shops. And in order to get started, our board said we had to raise, I think, somewhere around $50,000. And we did that in about 3 months. The way we did it is we had talked to grocery store managers and asked if they're willing to ask people that shop there to add a quarter to their bill. And and it just grew out of that. It grew extremely quickly, a lot quicker than we had thought it would. And it was about 3 months that we actually hit our target. And so we got the approval to move ahead. So what we do now is we designed, I think in the introduction, someone had said that we use grocery cards, but we don't use the grocery cards because, we found there's a certain element out there that will sell food cards. There is a big issue with drugs and everything else in our community. And so anyways, we do an intake.
John, I'm just gonna, sorry, John, I'm just gonna interrupt for you for a second. I'm getting a couple of comments that people can't hear you very well. Okay. So I'm just gonna interrupt for a second. Someone did tell me that I could put on captions so we can capture what you're saying, but I can't see how to do that in Zoom. So Bethany, if you're there, I'm also hearing that maybe if you use your mic closer to your mouth, we might be able to hear you a little bit. So can we just do a test? Test 1, 2, 3.
Sure. Okay, is that working for people?
You just give some comments if you can hear him better.
That's much better.
Much better. Okay.
Yeah.
There are also audio settings. You could up your mic volume within Zoom, the little arrow next to the microphone.
Okay.
go audio settings, and then just make sure your microphone volume is right, maxed out.
Oh, do we still have John?
I'm just moving up my,
Oh, good. Okay.
okay, is that helping?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Oh, it's not helping? Ramsay's saying it's not helping. It is helping. Okay.
Oh, it is. Okay, anyways, if you missed it, we do issue our own design food cards to people that are need help with food, and the way we funded was through donations at the cash register at the grocery stores, and yeah, we're getting some too from just general donations from people that really like the program, and I'd also mentioned that we did set the donation amount rather low. We did a quarter for a purpose because even those that were using the system were able to support it with donating a quarter. A lot of them said, "Well, that's way too low." So it's kind of a way where we could have everybody involved in donating, not just the haves and the have-nots. And we feel that's one way of respecting the dignity of people in those that are less fortunate in our community. Yeah, we have our food cards that we issue, and they come in and we do a little bit of an intake. And I think one of the things that's kind of helpful, I know it's kind of how we get rid of the stigma, but we also have a way, we found out when we started the program that a lot of people were really tied up into the money marks. And we had to deal with that issue because, you know, it's causing a lot of stress and taking a lot of funds away from people that didn't have it. So we did a lot of work around that. And, but yeah, backing up to the food card again, it's a matter of giving people who shop where everybody else shops in the community. And also recognizing, as Katie had said, that people that are at the lower end of the economic scale have the resources or know how to cook. And yeah, it's amazing when we talk to a lot of people, you know, their abilities, what they're capable of doing. And we feel that the food cards have given the people the opportunity to shop for the foods they like and they need. And just giving them the choice, which a lot of people, when they're interviewed about what are the worst things about poverty, most of the responses are the lack of choice. So that also addresses that issue. And it's kind of a simple way of getting funds, collect funds for the program, is just that make the donations when you are shopping yourself and thinking of others that don't have the resources to enjoy the same experience that you do. So, yeah, like Katie had mentioned, or somebody earlier said there's more food around than we know what to do with. And yeah, how do we find access, or how do we access that as a very convenient way? And we don't we're able to do all of our work out of a room in a church basement, and we kind of have it set up as kind of a place where you can just come in and have a discussion. We're open 3 days a week in Woodstock and 2 days a week in Ingersoll. And quite often people come in and they'll talk about other issues that are really that need some help, or they aren't aware of the programs that are out in the community to help them. So we kind of help them get established and get access to the programs that are available. So yeah, that's a big part of our thing. A big thing is through all the programs we do have, it's kind of it has to be inclusive to things that are in the society. We don't design programs for just support. Yeah, we do have a number of other programs we do too, like that we used to do a knapsack program, which we got together with Children's Aid Society United Way, and now we work with Staples. So people that need help with school supplies, they can go to Staples and get it. They call the United Way to get a code number, and they go to Staples and shop for themselves. We've done, we used to have a soup kitchen, and we changed it to a model of kind of a community restaurant. So we started charging for it. And so that before COVID, we had a place where we had meals that were available for people, but we actually charged. And the reason we did it, we were finding when we had the free soup kitchen, where people weren't getting anything, we were noticing a lot of people walking in with large Tim Hortons coffee, and we kind of, what kind of a message are we sending when we are giving free food, a meal, and we're giving it for nothing, and yet they're buying coffees, double-sized coffees. So we felt we were sending the wrong message, but also we found that a lot of people were more than happy to pay just to help their dignity, that they're actually paying for contributing something. And it also, we attracted a lot of business people that were in the downtown area that would come in and have lunch, but they paid a regular price for what a meal would be, we should be charging for. So yeah, so we kind of look at integrating things. We don't do stuff like Christmas hampers. We set up a Christmas place where people can buy gifts at a reasonable price. So they're actually able to buy things for their own kids. And the way that gets funded, we just ask people to donate toys, but we bring it to a place and we set up kind of a store thing. But eventually our goal is to actually use the same kind of a setup as we do with the food cart system, where people can go shop for their own kids at places where everybody else in the community is. So it's kind of more integrated. Yeah, so it's we really look at integrating people into what already exists in the community. Getting back to our Bullwinkle thing, program, the restaurant program, we also work with various agencies that work with women or anyone in the community to get back in the workforce. It's kind of giving out food handler certificates, and they help prepare the food for the Bullwinkles. So it's kind of training and preparing people for the workplace. And a number of our people have gone on to work in restaurants and other places in our community. So yeah, that's basically, I think, what we're kind of about. Some of the challenges we have is still have to do a lot of education about our approach to food insecurity, and trying to get people to think a little bit more deeply about, what is poverty. And yeah, the food bank model has been with us for 40 years, and just trying to have a discussion about, there are other ways of doing it that are more dignified and empower people to use their skills they already have to access stuff that is already in our community. Yeah, and yeah, some of the things we did as an organization about 3 years ago, we had a town hall meeting on poverty, and we were fortunate enough to get Dr. Lynn McIntyre from the University of Calgary to come down and lead a workshop. She did a presentation one evening, and then the next day we had all the community leaders come in, and she did a workshop on the effects of poverty, and really started having a discussion about poverty. So out of that came we formed a group in our community with reducing poverty in Oxford County. So we're kind of trying to address some of the bigger issues, and how do we approach do some education about the basic income to get people to make sure that we change that whole system of empowering and giving those in our community that are less fortunate more resources and funds, because that all comes down to money one way or the other. And yeah, and I think it's something that is going to take everybody in our community, is going to take give of the individual members, because what's probably going to happen if they get to the basic income, we may have to pay a little bit more tax, but the thing is, it's going to be much better for our whole community as far as the health and well-being of the community. So is there anything else I should be adding?
That was great, John. We can, if you want, we can wait and people can ask questions. I'm sure there's lots of questions about how you made that shift, but I just wanted to say thank you for kind of bringing that concept of choice that you've integrated into programs. And I really like the concept of people using the skills and procedures and networks and processes and pathways that they already had to purchase at local stores. So, and also the way that you were sort of connecting people back to the work that you did around Money Mart. I think that's a very interesting kind of byproduct of being able to connect people to services. So thank you very much for that. And I think now, if we're ready, we've got a few questions that have come in through the chat. So what I might do is, I know there's a couple of people that I've just made a note of, and I'm going to ask you to ask your own question, if that's okay. So we did see a question from Suzanne. And Suzanne, I'm thinking that maybe you just, are you still there with us? Okay, so Suzanne, maybe I'll ask the question for her. So Suzanne had a question, I think for Katie at FoodShare, about how, when you were expanding your Good Food Box program from the smaller number to the 5,000, how you worked kind of through a community development approach or utilized local farming resources in that effort.
Sure. So we are very fortunate in that we are close to the food terminal. So that geographically makes a lot of these projects just a different context than folks who aren't close to the food terminal. But we work with a buyer at the food terminal who is able to identify sources. And so a lot of local growers go through the food terminals one way, and then we still buy a lot of food directly from growers. So like Fennings and Norfolk fruit growers. And we also, because our scale is so high, like we're buying like 500,000 apples from Norfolk fruit growers. So the scale of us as a purchaser is quite significant. For FoodShare, we have always said that fresh food first, local food second, organic food third. Preferably if you can get all three, that's great. But that, especially in our context in Toronto, we don't want to shame folks for not being able to either find or afford a local option, depending also on seasonality. For many people, their priority is affordability. And so we do, a lot of the food that we supply in the Good Food Box doesn't come from local growers. And we're very honest about that in what we're communicating. And partly that's because we want to make sure that people have access to culturally appropriate food and staple foods for their communities. So for some people, that's plantains or mangoes, or breadfruit is a tropical fruit, right? And being able to say that there are, what we want is for everyone to have as much choice as possible, all the information that they can have about how the food system works, and then the ability to make choices themselves without shame or stigma. That's our goal. So because our purchasing power is so large, even though we do sell quite a bit of imported food, we also still buy a lot of food directly from local growers all year round, and particularly in the summer. There's about 20 weeks in the summer where the Good Food Box is entirely supplied by local growers, but not year round, because we just can't, we wouldn't be able to afford it.
That's great. Thank you very much. We also had a question from Jane and sort of Jane McDonald, and then Kate McNaughton sort of followed up on that question. So Jane, are you still there? And can I maybe you could ask your question directly to the panelists.
Sure, thank you. I'm just trying to see what I wrote down here. Okay. Yeah, these were amazing. Thank you very much. Really inspiring presentations. So Jane McDonald, Chair with Prince Edward Learning Center. I'm just wondering, what is your guys' approach to partnerships, both locally and outside of your community, especially when it comes to, you know, advocacy and addressing systemically issues of food justice? So how important, how do you think about, how do you approach partnerships in that regard? And really any of the presenters, I'd love to hear what you had to say. Thank you.
I'll go first, I guess. Again, I'll be number one. I like that. I'd like to speak maybe to the local aspect around social justice. And I think what's really important is you can't fight your way to the table in a way that looks militant, and in a way that people are going to, who already are at the table, are going to regard you as sort of a fringe aspect, or somebody who's, you know, wanting them to change their approach quickly and that sort of thing. You really need to present yourself as a leader in the on the issue, a leader in the community. You want to be invited to the table. You want to be wanted at the table. And so you really need to set yourself up as somebody who should be at the table, as opposed to trying to fight your way in. We find that's the most effective, particularly with the municipal government here. They manage all of the social programming for the county, and so and are quite territorial. And so it was really about trying to get them to regard us as somebody they can consult with. And it took, you know, I've been here 5 years. Probably the first 3 was just trying to get on their council agenda, to make presentations, to talk to them about what we're doing. And finally, what happened was they did start to come to us for advice, and they did start inviting us to the table. And now they have signed a 10-year lease for our community garden site, which is 5 acres of city land that we have complete control over, because they've really bought into what we do. We are have been invited to the homelessness committee to provide advice on supporting homeless people in a holistic way. And we are in a partnership with them on providing food access for the individuals that they house at the motels and that sort of thing. But that was an invitation in that took a while to secure. So again, and I think Ramsay alluded to this, it's a long haul. It's not something that, you know, you're going to be able to do overnight, but you need to start now and make those small steps, knowing it's going to be a while before you can really affect change. And on the national stage, we have become part of coalitions that focus on the same issues that we are interested in affecting change in. And there's, I think that's par for the course for most CFCCs, that they do that. So that's my input into that anyway.
Anyone else on the panel like to comment on that question?
I'll just add that it's a very similar experience here in Perth in terms of engaging with our municipality. We recently got invited to make a presentation to a series of housing meetings the councils, county councils organizing. But on the national front, so individual sites may choose to liaise with national campaigns around basic income or other issues. And then we also have increasingly some capacity within our central affiliated organization, Community Food Centers Canada, that's now got a staff position dedicated to advocacy, and they're starting to figure out how to mobilize this network of sites and supporters across the country to do more. So our first foray into that was a report called the Beyond Hunger Report that you might be interested in checking out, and it had some very specific recommendations in it that Community Food Centers Canada developed. And there's a tension evolving and developing that's, I think, healthy in terms of sort of the central versus the local sites and what the recommendations are and where we all focus. But there's sort of an effort to try and mobilize this network across the country.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah. Oh, John, were you going to go?
Oh, go ahead. I'll go after you.
Okay, sure. I was going to add any win that I've ever been a part of with community mobilizing has been done in a coalition. And whether that was a formal coalition that had a name or just an informal coalition of people talking to each other about the goal we were trying to get to. So I think really think about who is around you, who has power, where is their sphere of influence, and how can you align yourselves together. It also allows for different actors within the coalition to take a different stance. It might be appropriate for one group to be very vocal, very demanding, very militant, very in your face, and have another group come and say, are you hearing this? We want to come to the table and provide you with the research that's going to help you up. And you're working together, but you don't necessarily know that. It allows you to use a lot of different sort of tactics and strategies in getting to the win that you want. And then I would also say that a key to that is relationship building. We see a lot of people will email FoodShare. I've never talked to them before. I have no idea what their work is about, and they want us to sign their letter. And I don't know the type of work they do. I don't know where they're coming from. And so for us, we're trying to really invest more time and energy in just getting to know the other people in our network who are working on similar issues. And for us, we know a lot of people working in food, but maybe we need to spend more time working with folks who are focused on income or houselessness. For us, there's large encampments in Toronto right now. We've been working with the Encampment Support Network to connect around the issues of food. So, and it's not always with an ask, like just getting to know people and building that relationship and trust and seeing where they're coming from helps. That then when you want to mobilize around how to approach a meeting or calling for a meeting with a politician, you're already familiar with those people. And then I would also say that those coalitions move at the speed of trust. So I think you got to feel like everyone who's at the table with you is kind of, even if you're filling different roles in different spots, you all kind of have that sense of, an ethic of trust and knowing where people are wanting to go and what sort of a strategy is. Because I think I've seen a lot of coalitions form and then fall apart quite quickly, or campaigns form and they don't go anywhere. So I think the relationship building and the developing some trust is helpful in sustaining like immediate wins, but then this is like it's a long-term game that we're in, right? So yeah, that would be my input.
Great, thank you.
I think you have to be consistent with your approach, and yeah, we've been done some work, like I said, with United Way and Children's Aid and a number of other organizations with the knapsack program, which I think has been quite successful. It's worked to the benefit of, they've made it a little bit easier for people that were supporting it, and also gave the people that needed the help a dignified way of being taking on some of that work themselves. And then, like I never mentioned it, but like we're in a smaller community, but our organization also runs a homeless shelter. So yeah, so we have earned the trust of our local government to get support for running the homeless shelter. So yeah, so I think it's yeah, you have to be consistent and yeah, and building the relationships, and yeah, I think just keeping that consistent message out there of what we're all about, as far as empowering people in our local community to do things, and also yeah, building those relationships with people that we need to. Anyways.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, John. And Councillor Kate McNaughton, did you have any follow-ups to that question?
Yes, well, a couple of specific questions I'd really like to hear about. The first, I didn't quite catch the 4 pillars that FoodShare works with, and I'd love to hear those again. And I'm also really interested in their supportive partners platform and how that has evolved, and whether there's a framework that's been built around it, or whether it's something that's very ad hoc depending on who's approaching for support. And that goes to, I think, what you were saying about relationships, Katie. And also I did miss, so Kathy, you referenced John talking about Money Mart, and I missed it a little, not just John's sound. Sorry, John, I did have some ambient sound in my own home at that moment in time, I think. So I'm interested in hearing about that, but perhaps if that was clear to everyone else, that can wait, and maybe I can hit them up for questions later. But the idea of, perhaps it did touch on this, the idea of building partnerships or trials, pilots with banking systems. I often think that there's I think there is a surcharge on poverty for a lot of our systems, with late charges or with service charges. And I'm really interested in hearing if any of the people who've done advocacy work here have done any sort of work trying to work in their own community on a smaller scale to advocate, or if they know of any communities to advocate with those systems to try to soften or remove that surcharge.
Okay, who'd like to respond to Kate's questions?
I can speak to the FoodShare ones. So I put a link to the Supportive Partnerships Platform program, which you can look at later if you like, but that sort of articulates sort of like briefly who we work with. Our priorities are that we're supporting grassroots groups that are working on solutions for their own communities. So we've had some people apply for support and they don't experience food insecurity, but they want to design an intervention for another group. That wouldn't be what this project is for. There's a number of other organizations that have what's called a shared platforms model. So if you want, I can connect with you and give you some more examples of that type of structure. Ours is, we prioritize working with groups who are low-income communities, newcomer communities, BIPOC communities, because for us in Toronto, those are the people who are most food insecure, and that we want to work with people who are working in Toronto and are working on food justice issues. But that could easily be centered around whatever is the issue in your community and how that works. And the idea is that we use our resources and infrastructure to provide supports to those groups that they maybe wouldn't be able to access in their sort of like getting off the ground phase. So they can use our vehicles, they can use our office, they get our bookkeeping staff support, they get support from our IT person. You know, the odds that they're going to hire an IT person are quite low. So it's just sharing the resources that we have as sort of an established charity with groups that are working on their own self-determined solutions. So there's a couple different organizations that are doing that across Ontario and across Canada, if you want more information about that. And then in terms of the advocacy pillars, our 4 pillars are reconciliation as food justice. So we're still always connecting it to the food system, racial justice as food justice, environmental justice, and advancing the right to food. So in Canada, we have the right to food. And what does it look like right now? It's there, but it's not realized. It's not in place. So trying to mobilize people around actually advancing that is something that we see. Yeah, and then I would say if you're interested, you should check out Acorn. They have campaigns around predatory loans and payday loans and mobilizing people around that. And there's some studies that they've done around what that is meaning for low income folks. Yeah.
John,
Thank you.
would you be able to follow up with maybe some more specifics of the kind of how the involvement in the payday loan programs happened?
Well, actually, we had a lady that was a debt counselor come in and talk to us about the program, you know, how to help people that are in this situation and some of the rules around what everybody isn't familiar with as far as there are some rules that as far as making loans to people that are on the OSDP and Ontario Works, and take advantage of that knowledge and then help people move on beyond it. It's a matter of yeah, what we did in a number of cases, we just turned the table around and let money mark go after the people that did have the loans and kind of help walk them through it, because there's a lot of nasty stuff that happens with it. Like they'll try a number of times, threaten court cases and stuff, or taking people to court and stuff like that. And yeah, the lady just told us just to sit tight and not worry about it until there was actually a court case, and then she said she'd step in and help. Yeah, what happens is there wasn't a lot of pushback from the money marks with the cases we were working with. And yeah, and then there was a lot of people understanding that they were in so deep that they couldn't do anything but declare bankruptcy, and helping people understand that they were worried about their credit score. Well, they were shocked. There's no other way around it, and we just help people going through the process, and to people that would help them declare bankruptcy. So those are you know, some of the things that we just had to dig in a little bit deeper on how we work through that. And you know, you can kind of work on getting laws and stuff that they aren't there, but maybe you just have to play the game with them and force them out of going out of business, because that model is very, well, yeah, it's very discriminatory, and it really does affect those less fortunate in our community. So,
Okay, great.
you
Thank you, John.
just follow the system right through and see how far it will go. So yeah, just some of the things you kind of learn as you're going along. So, okay.
Thank you very much. Great. Now there was a question in the chat from Suzanne. I'm not sure if Suzanne is still on the call. So maybe I'll just ask the question. So the question was, in terms of aging white populations, Katie, in Toronto, are those still considered groups that you, or how would you support food preferences there? Or is that something that might be done by another organization, or what would options be?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We have a number of good food markets that are run in senior settings. The reality is, if you take a random seniors building in Toronto, and particularly in neighborhoods where there is the most food insecurity, it is statistically going to be 60 to 70% racialized people. So our context is just different in terms of the demographics, but that's not to say that aging white folks don't deserve good food. Our point is everyone deserves good food, and everyone deserves access to the foods that they want to eat themselves. And that's why interventions like ours are good and okay, but ideally, I want everyone to have enough money that they themselves can procure the foods that they want that are important to them. And when we say that, you've heard a number of us on this call say that, programs aren't enough, food banks aren't enough. That's not to say that they aren't good. That's not to say that they aren't doing good right now for people in their lives. But what I want is for people not to need them because they can get the foods that they want. And if that means that they can afford to buy it from their neighbor down the road and support that local producer, amazing. And if that means that they can get the foods that their grandmother made for them because it nourishes their soul, amazing. But we want people to be able to have enough money to purchase food that aligns with their values and ethics and tastes and interests. And so I think it also connects to Ramsay's piece about abundance. When we talk about, for example, the food justice box that we added a box in the season in which all of the growers were racialized growers. That didn't take anything away from anyone. It added another option for purchasing. And so I think thinking of that abundance model of we can add more availability and more options, all of which include no stigma and no shame, then we're going to serve more people and we're going to serve them in better ways. And at the end of the day, FoodShare would love to not exist. We would love for people to have enough income or money, not from work, to be able to feed themselves the way they want with dignity and joy. And that's our mission, that we see a Toronto where everyone can feed themselves and their community and their family with dignity and joy. So that's what we're working towards.
That's great. Thank you for that. Very inspirational.
And maybe like this message is consistent with food banking organizations as well. So Food Banks Canada's ethical food banking guideline clearly states that food banks are not the solution to food insecurity. It's right there in black and white. And recently there was a webinar on food issues in the context of the pandemic, and the network coordinator for Food Banks Canada did a great job of laying out the limitations around food banking as a response to food insecurity. And so I know there can be some defensiveness around this within the food bank system, and I think we need to get work with that and get through that to find a variety of ways and to ultimately address the really systemic issues. The table runs a food bank, and we're very proud of the fact that we run a food bank. It's different than some of our neighboring rural food banks, which I do know firsthand are not necessarily offering the kind of service with dignity and quality of food that we aspire to. It's partly based on resources, and it's partly based on attitude about what they want to do. So that's sort of my response to some of the variety of comments that Suzanne's made in the chat.
Okay, thanks for that. Are there more questions that people have? Anything that anyone would like to ask?
There was one there about staffing levels. Kathy, should we address that?
Oh yeah, definitely. That's right. Thank you.
So do we have paid staff, I think, and what's the ratio of staff to volunteers? Absolutely. So the table we have a lot of part-time people, which is tricky as an ED and not necessarily what I would prefer. And from a social justice angle, it's kind of a weird reality, but it's in a rural setting, it's actually what a lot of my staff want to do because they're farming or they have a job at the library as well. But so altogether, we have 12 program coordinator type and support staff, and then we have 4 community navigators that are very part-time and paid. And then we have 120 to 150 volunteers that help out over the course of any one year. All of our programs run with a staff coordinator and then a team of volunteers to support them, whether that's the garden or the meals or a community kitchen or the food bank. There was one other nuance in there about staffing levels that I'm forgetting.
Yeah, maybe somebody could read that question. I'm just feeling my chat is frozen for some reason. So
yeah, so the question was, are there paid positions at CFCs and FoodShare? How much is volunteer versus paid? Do people in paid positions have lived experience?
That lived experience piece was what I was trying to remember. Thanks, Bethany. So to a certain degree, I would like it to be more. And that's certainly something we prioritize in our volunteer recruitment. We prioritize in our board recruitment, not to say we're always successful around that. And it's certainly, we're trying to address it in our staff hiring as well. So doing things like looking at credentialism and not necessarily requiring people to have a degree, but recognizing experience as important as having a degree. And posting salaries, and so there's a variety of practices around recruiting that from a equity lens, but we've got, frankly, we've got a ways to go on that front still at the table.
And just to add to what Ramsay is saying, there is a requirement by Community Food Centers Canada that we have to meet around certain staffing levels to provide the programming that they and services that they require us to provide. And the goal is always to provide well-paying full-time positions as much as possible. We're a living wage employer, so that we make sure we stick to that every year or two. It's reevaluated in our community, and we make sure we rise to those levels of wages. And as far as lived experience, one of the goals we have, and we don't always get it right, and it is a challenge, as Ramsay expressed, is, you know, there's been some occasions where we've had somebody come in because they come in for a meal or for a program or something, and then they turn into a volunteer, and then they, you know, learn some leadership skills, or we discover their leadership skills would be a better way of putting it. And they end up being employed by us. And you know, that's a process as we get to know people. Sometimes it's very successful and sometimes not quite as successful as we would like it to be. So it is sometimes a challenge, but it's always something that we aspire to do.
Great, thank you for that, Deborah. And I see a follow-up, or I see a question in the chat, which I've got unfrozen now. From Jane, and that is, we have an audience today of elected officials and funders. To our presenters, what is one message you'd like everyone here to come away with? Maybe we'll start with you, John. You're on mute, John. Are you okay to unmute?
Okay. Well, I think there's different areas or ways of dealing with poverty and food insecurity, and I think we have to explore them, what works for, like sometimes like we have looked at like a food community food center in a place like Oxford County, and yeah, it was going to be quite expensive, and we kind of wondered, is it something that would really fit for our community? And so yeah, so we thought by not having a lot of overhead and everything, that we could send or use a lot of our resources going directly to the people that needed to access stuff that was already, like food and everything that was already in existence, rather than having kind of two-tiered system. So yeah, so it's you really have to kind of know your own community, see what works, and yeah, don't be tied down to one model, because yeah, they have their own issues that works. Like I think FoodShare is a great model, but it works because of the area they're in and the population they're dealing in. You know, it'd be interesting to see, you know, like breaking down to what percentage of the population uses it, so you get a better idea of you know, would that work or what would it represent in different locations. So I think that's yeah, I think really keep on working on policies and why there's so much poverty in a rich country like Canada. I think that needs to be discussed as one of the main areas. So anyways, I don't know, leave it at that.
Great, thank you very much. And then Katie, I see you next on my screen, so I think I'll call on you.
Sure. For funders, I would say give more unrestricted money and commit it for multiple years, and trust organizations to spend it the way that they need to spend it. That is forever my request from anyone giving any money. If you like the organization or you like the work that they're doing, just give them some money. They'll send you a report on what they did with it. And if you can do it for you know, the same amount for 3 years, that's going to help them with planning, and that's going to allow them to do the work that drew you to the organization in the first place. And for elected officials, I say two things which are kind of opposite. One is don't be afraid to do bold things. We need people who are willing to just try something new and know that some people aren't going to like it, but some people are going to love it and they need it. And we just need to give it a try, because we've been working on the same things forever. If that's not an option, do a pilot. One thing we do in Toronto often is, can you do a 1-year pilot? And then that gets through, because there's a timeline, and it's going to go to council after the year. And what you find during that year is no one complained, and it helped a lot of people. And now can we implement it long term? So those are my two strategies around trying to get things through the door. And it's very helpful to have elected officials who are on board with kind of moving either of those options forward.
I would just add to that too, for the municipal councillors, take the politics out of it. And by that I mean, you know, I know it comes down to, you know, dollars and cents and numbers and statistics and all of that, but I think sometimes the focus is too much on those things instead of our community and what our community needs. And so I think when we have discussions, particularly when you're pulling partners in, but even, you know, through your council meetings, discussions are about people. It's not just numbers. People, these are people in your community, and you need to take the politics out of it when you are discussing the things that are most important in making sure that you're sustaining the social capital of the community. Because if you don't have social capital in your community is not going to be sustainable. So you really need to be thinking about it in terms in the human cost, as opposed to just the monetary cost.
Awesome responses. I agree with everything that folks have said, and maybe I would just add to municipal councillors, invest in the community to the best that you can, and also learn to make the argument of the cost savings of upstream approaches. You know, the costs of Proof has done some work on food insecurity and the cost of healthcare. There's, you know, lots to show that keeping people housed in good housing and stable housing is much more affordable than shelters, and certainly orders of magnitude more affordable than incarceration. And so learn to put the investments in community in context of upstream investments and actually saving us money in the long run if we could grapple with some of these complex issues in a more complete way.
Great. Thank you for those. Those are all great advice for us all, not just the counselors. Now, I think, Ruth, did you have a practical question about good food boxes that you'd like to ask?
Yeah, we have when we want to try and use local food here, we find that, which we would love to, but we find difficulty in the pricing to our organization. It's so much higher than the wholesaler price. So how do you balance that out, still wanting to support the local agriculture and the local farmer, but keeping the price? I mean, our good food box is a little bit different than FoodShare, our model, because we are serving people who are food insecure. We did a survey a couple of years ago, and like a 47% self-identified as being food insecure who were using the food box. So we know that it is, a large portion are food insecure. So how do would you suggest using the local? Is there a way I can do that but keep the price? Yeah. So I'm putting the most food in the box. That how FoodShare has always, your model before.
Yeah, a couple things. One is that's the reason that the box is only local when it's abundant and in season, and we're able to purchase from growers when they have a surplus of something and put that into the box. The second is to think of it as an annual cost, and that the cost is going to be higher at certain times of year and less at certain times of year, but you're going to keep the price point the same. And some weeks your margin's a little higher, and some weeks it's a little lower, helps. And also for us, like we found that for a long time, FoodShare thought the Good Food Box was like a food security initiative. When we talk to people who shop at good food markets, the folks who were food insecure and really living on a low income would rather shop at the market, because the box was a set, you got set items, and it was what, $20 or so. It's always been within, $18, $20. At a market, they could spend $5 or $10 and they could get exactly what they want that's going to complement maybe what they're getting from other sources. And that's why we pivoted to say the box has a margin on it that is bringing us revenue, that revenue is funding the markets, and the markets are the ones that are actually reaching the folks who are food insecure. So I think the fact that who's using your box and what their income levels are like and what their food security, that's the key point, right? Is I think a lot of times people design interventions on what they think a community needs without really knowing who they're meeting and is it serving them. And overwhelmingly, everyone that we've spoke to that's experiencing food insecurity and severe food insecurity said, I'd rather go to a market and spend $3. I'd rather spend $2.50 on, some fresh fruit, because I know that I can get these other things from other places. So it doesn't really answer your question, but maybe it gives you some insight on how we think about it.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. It's just something we're always going back and forth with. The other thing is about keeping people who are food insecure engaged. Like, you want to put them in the front and make sure that they are part of what you're doing, asking them questions and stuff, but how do you keep them engaged? Like recognizing that people who are in poverty are living in stressful situations, some are at risk of homelessness, they're in crisis, and we've involved people and then, they have to move on. So is there a way to keep that relationship long-term? I mean, we pay an honorarium often, but is there other things that you do?
I mean, we paying people, right? So if you're asking people to do work, you pay them for their work, and you pay them at the same rate that you would pay anyone who's doing that work. I mean, part of my answer to the question about volunteers is FoodShare doesn't have any volunteers that are doing a job that should be paid. So if someone wants to volunteer for their own learning, they can come in and learn how to turn the compost pile because that's of interest to them. But if we need someone to turn the compost pile, that's a paid job. And then our HR sort of recruitment and job application review processes are set up in a way that they prioritize applications from people who have lived experience with food insecurity and food justice. So that means that, you know, slowly as we've had those policies in place, we have people in management and in coordinator level positions and in staff positions who grew up and who sometimes are at the time of arriving at FoodShare Food Insecure. So I think that for us has been the key shift, is we don't ask anyone to volunteer. And I like hearing that, you talk about honorariums and things like that and really valuing people's time. That's really important. I see Ramsay has a hand up. Do you, yeah, a little icon.
I also have two people trying to get in my office despite the
Okay.
pandemic and things. And I'm not wearing a mask. So I can't even remember what I was going to say now. The cost of local food. So one possibility, I think, especially in the county, might be a targeted fundraising campaign around support us buying local food. We did that in partnership with Eastern Ontario grain producer called Against the Grain Farms. They co-promoted it, and it sort of piddled away. And then one day I looked at our accounting balance, and we had $1,200 accumulated in donations to help us buy produce or products from Against the Grain Farms, which are local grain producers. So I think there is a lot of interest in local and people, and it may be a way to up your revenue by having a targeted fund. It's you don't want to do too much targeted fundraising. As Katie said, the best money is the money that just comes to do what you need to do with it, but it's one possibility.
Great. Well, I'm gonna, are there any other questions that people have? We're kind of coming close to our time, but any last questions?
I have
Okay,
one.
well, I'm going. Oh, great.
Can I make one point? I think that there's a lot of what I've shared about FoodShare that will not translate to your community. And I think that there are bits and pieces that might translate. One thing I do want to emphasize is FoodShare recently did some research in partnership with Proof around food insecurity in Black households. And we used data from across Canada. So this is not Toronto specific. And what we found is that food insecurity rates among Black households is 3.56 times higher than other households, including white households. And when we corrected for housing and education and all of those little bits, it was still 2 times higher. So one thing I did want to say is, even if you are living in a community that is less racially diverse as Toronto, I want to encourage you to think about racism within the food system, and whether you've devoted some really thoughtful, intentional thought to what that means for Black or Indigenous or racialized folks in your own community, even if the proportion of those folks is smaller than from an environment like Toronto. And I'll put a link here for, there's a Toronto Star article that kind of explained the research. So I just wanted to, I know sometimes it's easy to be like, oh, Toronto, it's different, but a lot of it is the same. So yeah.
We do an annual survey of our participants, and this year was especially difficult because of the pandemic.
Right.
So it was a much more limited sample size, but I went into StatsCan data, which is probably quite problematic, but it was the best I could get in terms of trying to figure out what the percentage of racialized and Indigenous people are in our area, and it's around 4%. But 12% of the people responding to our survey identified as Indigenous or people of color. So that's 3 times the population within our participant base. So it's still a really relevant question, even in areas that don't appear to be terribly diverse, as Katie said.
No, I think that's very similar here, and I certainly appreciate those comments for sure. I'm going to hand it back to Christine to say thank you, and I'm wondering if maybe the panelists can just, after we all leave, can we just stay on so that we can maybe look at some follow-up opportunities, if that's okay for the panelists. But I also wanted to ask everybody on the call here, to put in the chat, because we are part of a research project, and it's a great having you all here and getting your thoughts while you're here. So can you, before you go, in the chat, say what is the one thing you want to take forward from what the ideas that you've heard today in terms of what's applicable to our community. And it doesn't have to be one thing. If you have more, that's great as well. So Christine, over to you.
Great, that's great. I just want to say a huge thanks to Ramsay, John, Katie, and Debra. So wonderful. I don't know if I told you about the process of how we identified you, but we asked our food collective members, who are your rock stars of like food innovation in Ontario? And that's how we found you. So we identified you as rock stars. So huge thanks for your rock star work on food. And I think we've learned a lot. So I'm kind of doing some writing up while you're talking to identify some of our key learnings. And I didn't talk too much about it, but our food collective, we are doing some research with the Prince Edward Learning Center in the county to look at and identify what our plans are. So we've just done a survey with about 100 people who identify as experiencing food insecurity, to identify what their priorities are for our policy advocacy, for our food programs, and how we're pivoting. So that's going to be informing a lot of our next steps. And we reached out to food programs for their plans so we can kind of get, move from the emergency piece, which we need, but also look at that long-term piece of what can we do collectively to address systemic issues, both through food and through policy advocacy. And I feel like we're super lucky to have as many councillors, to have our municipality on board. So I just also want to say a big shout out to the municipal councillors. I saw a few of you joining today, so huge thanks for joining this discussion, and looking forward to continue that discussion. I know we're running out of time. I was going to ask you for one more question, but I'm not going to do that, but maybe in the follow-up question moment we'll chat. So just again, a huge thanks, and to the food collective members, we should in a couple of weeks be able to start sharing back all of our phone calls and emails and talks with you over the last couple of months to help inform our next steps. And to those of you visiting from Hastings County and beyond, just a huge thanks, and looking forward to learning from you guys as well. So I think maybe we have some opportunities to connect with the North, and find out what you're doing as well. So just a huge thanks to everyone. And I also I meant to point out Cynthia Warden and Robert and Brianni, who are working on this food project with us, doing research as well as writing. So just want to notice them for their contributions as well. So a huge thanks to everyone, and hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. And it looks like there's lots of messages coming up in the chat.
Okay.
So lots of thanks.
That's great. I know. Thank you so much, everybody. That was great. Well, for our panelists, I just always feel it always feels a little bit unnormal when we just sort of sign off on Zoom. And I just wanted to take the time to really say thank you for what you brought to us today in Prince Edward County. It's an odd format to share information with this, with folks, and you did a super amazing job. And I know that you've really challenged us and given us some great ideas. And Katie, I think, there's lots that's applicable. Your philosophy and the principles are applicable everywhere, and how we decide to interpret that, I think is the same way that, that you've done that at the table and in Woodstock and in Perth and in Stratford. So I think that those principles are showing through for everybody. So thank you for taking the time to hang out with us today. It's a big deal for us.